My name is Dan Gorman. I teach in the Department of History at the University of Waterloo and also at the Balsillie School of International Affairs here at Waterloo as well. I do research on international and imperial history and look at some of the many ways, especially in the 20th century, that imperialism and internationalism intersected. So some alliteration there. So what I've done in the past is looked at the history of imperial citizenship, the ways that in the global British Empire, people around the world were brought together both politically, but also culturally, economically, and socially. More recently, I've spent time working on what I've called the emergence of international society in the 1920s. One of the signature events of the 20th century, of course, is the First World War, and one of the many important international consequences of the First World War is the breakdown, or at least the beginning of the breakdown, of global empires. And one of the things that emerged in the sort of aftermath of the war itself were a whole series or networks of international cooperation. So that's what that project was about. The work that I'm doing now continues that interest in the intersection of empire and internationalism, looking at the period after the Second World War. One of the interesting dynamics in the international system after 1945 is, of course, the global process of decolonization. Roughly 2/3 of the states in the international system today were born after 1945. So what I'm interested in learning more about, and this is my current research project, is to what extent did that process of decolonization, the end, or at least the beginning of the end of global empires, specifically global European empires, to what extent did that influence the creation after 1945 of the sort of global presence or practice of international governance. Coming out of the Second World War, we have, amongst other things, the United Nations created. And the project that I'm working on right now is looking at the various ways which the end of empire led or influenced the creation and then the early work of the UN. So specifically, one of the aspects of that project is to look at how and why large numbers of men and women who worked in the British colonial service, as well as the Indian political service, the Indian civil service, in the 1940s, transitioned to work in the various bodies of the UN after 1945. And one of the bodies that I'm looking at right now, which many of you will perhaps be familiar with from trick-or-treaters showing up with orange boxes at your door on Halloween, is Unicef. And Unicef, like many UN bodies, recruited quite actively from the British as well as other colonial services, but specifically the British colonial service. So that's sort of one specific aspect of this broader project, which again is driven by an interest in trying to tease out the influences of colonialism and decolonization on the creation and intensification as the 20th century progressed of practices of international governance.